So thank you guys for coming, and we'll just jump right into some of the similarities and differences and help you guys make your choices for these. So some of the basic questions that people wonder about these two programs, what are they essentially? So today we're going to go over some of the formats, the timelines, the schedules. A lot of other people have questions about university admissions. So where are these accepted? How are they weighted? If you're going to the UK, if you're going to the US, or if you're going into Hong Kong or elsewhere. Strengths and weaknesses, especially as those pertain to specific subject areas as well, if you're going to get into STEM or if you're going to get into languages or any other subjects. And then eventually making that choice and what those choices actually look like moving forward. Okay, so here's just some quick stats on IB and AL. 153 countries for the IB. This is growing and growing and growing. A-levels over 130 countries for themselves. And when it starts to come to the future of education, what we're seeing is international schools like Harrow International or some of the other more popular schools around the world coming into places like Hong Kong or mainland China and other sorts of places. These international schools are somewhat like businesses, and when they open them up, they're going to decide which format do we actually use. Are we going to actually go with the British format for our students? Are we going to go for the IBDP? Are we going to offer both? Some schools will actually give you the opportunity to sort of choose which one is the best for me. And so we're going to get into these two really highly popular curriculums as we move forward. In Hong Kong, there's actually a lot more choice when it comes to IB. There are 30 just DP schools. So DP schools are basically grade 11, grade 12, the final 2 years. But there are actually 60 schools in Hong Kong that are primary years program, the middle years program, and then the diploma program as well. So if you're looking for different schools or if you're changing schools, you've got a lot more options when it comes to the IB, just sort of 10 when it comes to the A-level. So you can kind of see all of these differences among the different schools in Hong Kong. There are so many options when it comes to the IB versus the AL. And something that just educators have noticed over time, over the last 5-10 years or so, is that despite the A-levels previously being the gold standard when it came to British education, we're actually seeing a little bit of a decline in that trend globally. And a lot more schools, when they open up or when they renovate or redo their curriculums, they're switching to the IB. And there are a lot of reasons why they do that, and we're going to discuss some of those, but also give you the sort of main points of everything you need to know for these two programs. Okay, so like I mentioned earlier, we're going to go through some different profiles. Where did these programs come from? Why are they so popular? Why are schools around the world, Hong Kong, mainland China, all over the world, sort of using these programs as their gold standard for education for university admissions? The actual processes as far as the scheduling is concerned, I know a lot of people are worried about what does the first year look like, what does the second year look like if I'm trying to prepare for these. And then again, the advantages and disadvantages, very important as you prepare for those university admissions. And I think one of the main things is no matter what you choose for your student or for your learner, that you just want to know what your options are, and because both of these are really great programs. Let's be very clear. Both of these are excellent programs, but you want to be able to know what your options are for different subjects. You want to know what your options are for timings and schedulings and things like this. So, having that knowledge is just, it makes everything so much more comfortable for you as you go through this process. Okay, so first off, the IBDP. This is sort of the report card, the identity of the IB. It came out of sort of the post-World War II era of education in Europe. And what we started to see was a lot of students from different countries, starting to come to schools where all of the different curriculums in Europe were slightly different. And so there needed to be a unified curriculum for everybody coming in. And if we look at that today, 2019 around the world, there's so many different countries around the world with different curriculums, different assessments, that it's kind of nice to just sort of unify all of these and try to have one solid program or so that we can get together and agree upon. But if you kind of look through some of these programs, you'll start to get the idea of the IB learner and what kind of students really profit from the IB. You have the typical stuff like, oh, you're going to get a great depth of knowledge, you're going to learn about your subjects, all these sorts of things. But one of the great parts about the IB is they sort of stress a well-rounded learning process, right? It's not just about academics. You'll get those traditional subjects down here, but you'll also get a lot of the physical activity, a lot of emphasis on teamwork, and having empathy, sympathy, gaining that moral understanding of different cultures around the world as you go through the IB. And being such an international program, there is an emphasis on multiple languages. We can talk about those a little bit later as well. But this is what I was saying earlier about other people and their differences can be right too. This is sort of the ethos of the IB. They want students to be able to look at different perspectives and understand them and see those perspectives from somebody else's viewpoint, in somebody else's shoes. But this is their essential mission, and we kind of look at, okay, a balanced education, but it's really all about mobility. Going from one IB school to another, you're really not going to miss a beat. There's only one exam board, okay? With the A-levels, there's basically 5, okay? We're going to talk more about this later, and if you transfer schools, if you go from Hong Kong to the UK from an IGCSE or an AL system and you move around a lot, some of those exam boards can actually affect what happens to your scores and how fast you complete those programs. So, with that mobility of the IB, you kind of just can jump around and enter different systems and prepare no matter where you go in the world. And again, as far as university preparation, US, UK, HK, Australia, Canada, all these different places, you will be prepared for those different curriculums. Now you're already going to start to see a contrast with the A-levels. One of the main things that they sort of focus on is independent work. You should be able to actually study and focus on every individual subject without a teacher, without a class or a group of other students. You can qualify for your A-levels at home, alone. You don't necessarily even need a school. I wouldn't recommend that per se. But the A-levels are way more focused on independent excellence and being able to study, prepare for those exams, in an independent way. There is a little bit less of a emphasis on international languages. They're taught in English, whereas the IB is taught in English, Spanish, and French. And then you can actually choose from, so many other languages just around the world as your second one as well. So this is sort of the immediate difference with the philosophy of the A-levels, is that you don't necessarily rely on a class or a teacher or even group work per se. And that has its advantages and disadvantages as well when you're studying. Overall, the A-levels is essentially a sort of a government-approved program. But there are so many different exam boards who run this program in different ways that they see fit. And the entire idea is preparation for university, but also sort of after university. And we're going to take a look at how effective that actually is, and a little bit of the decline of the A-levels when we think about independent working and independent thinking. Okay, there are advantages to that, but in an increasingly international and global marketplace, there are also some disadvantages to that as well. But that's the idea, sort of preparation, where you learn these skills and then you should be able to actually apply them in real situations, whether that's a university situation, whether that is a career setting for you. That's what the A-levels really emphasize. And again, they're all good for university admissions. A lot of people ask, which one's better for unis? Well, it really does depend. We're going to get really deep into the various subjects and how US, UK, and HK unis sort of look at these or view these and what preferences they have for different subjects. But essentially, you'll be able to go to college with either or. Okay, so here is a look at the IB, and you kind of see, I think one of the main things here is that there are actually higher level programs versus standard level programs, and you've got to get 6 total. Okay, 3 highers, 3 lowers, and English, science, math, your second language, you've got to choose something. Okay, a lot of people in Hong Kong just choose Chinese, obviously, because that's sort of an easier score. But don't mess it up. But you'll have to choose two. And then you've kind of got your option. And depending on what you want to do for university, is that option in an economics class? Is that option a history or politics class because you want to go to law school or whatever it might be? So you do have a little bit of freedom here, but I will admit there's less freedom than the A levels because you've got to have English, you've got to have math and science, whereas the A levels you're actually choosing all of them for yourself, right? But this is where it gets really interesting. These are the program requirements for everybody. And the first one is called the extended essay. The extended essay is infamous because it is a 4,000-word research paper, and it's really the first chance that many students get to actually create a university-level document, a university-level research paper. This takes a little less than a year for students to write. They started off, and we'll get into the schedule, they started off before the end of the first year, and then they're going to submit it just after winter break. So they have a lot of time to do this, but it is quite challenging. The theory of knowledge, there's actually two parts to this. The theory of knowledge is kind of like a philosophy class. You're going to ask, what is knowledge? How do we know what we know? So it's very, very philosophical, and students have to perform an oral presentation, but they also have to write an essay on this as well. And a lot of students, they're finishing their essays right now. They're due at the end of January, but they started them, some time ago. So it's quite challenging, and it's very philosophical and confusing at times for students. This is called the CAS, the Creativity Action Service, and it's required by everybody. It's about 150 hours, though there's no official number on this. And basically what this does is it ensures community service, it ensures some kind of physical activity, athletics or whatever, hiking even, it doesn't have to be actually joining a sports team. And then the creativity part is, are you into music? Are you into art? What kind of passionate, things are you into that you can actually use to display your development, your growth as a student? And this is actually required by everybody, no matter what classes you're actually taking. So it is a little bit extra for students to take care of. The assessments. I like this guy right here. He's got red eyes. A lot of the IB students, they complain about sleep. There's a lot of memes for IB teens and how they have so many different assessments. Basically, there's two main categories how you can break these down. There are external assessments. And external assessments mean that they're actually sent out. They're sent out to official IB examiners to mark for you. Okay, so your teacher might give you mock scores, or your teacher might give you predicted grades, but ultimately the external assignments for the different subjects are marked by somebody in the IB organization versus the internal. And the internal are just that. This is where the teachers actually stay and mark you. They provide the grades. Now, what if the teacher is very strict? What if you have a bad relationship with the teacher? These are also double checked by the IB, but there's very rarely a change between the teacher's score and then the IB's score as well. And the way that you break these down is essentially anything written, typed, that's external, you send it off. Anything spoken, any kind of activities where you need to actually perform, that's internal with the teacher sort of taking care of those marks. So all those oral presentations and things like that, the teacher marks for you. And you can see there's a lot of stuff here, guys. There's so many different assessments. You talk about the IB students staying up late at night. I've got some tips on how to avoid that if possible. But yeah, you definitely want to know when your assessments are happening and what you need to do to sort of focus your time and energy. And I know you've seen some of these firsthand, right? So yeah. But the breakdown is very easy actually as far as the score. You'll have those 6 subjects, the 3 higher level and then the 3 standard level. Okay? And those are a maximum of 7 points each. The minimum you really want is a 5. Below a 5, you kind of failed. It's not officially failing, but below a 5 by Hong Kong standards, by many standards, below a 5 is not that great. Okay, so you do want to get close to that 7 as close as possible. Obviously, that'll give you 42, and then combined together with the essay, the theory of knowledge, and your hours of service and all of those things, you'll get the 45. So what's great about this is it's very straightforward. You know exactly where your points are coming from. There are a lot of assessments so that you're continually updated. Even if it's an external thing, your teacher can kind of look at your work for you. These teachers are trained. You know, a lot of them have been in the IB for years, and they can say, here's what I think your external grade would be. So there's a lot of assessments, yes. But the good part about that is you do get a lot of those updates, and you do have a very strong sense of what your final score will actually be. Okay, 2 years. Here it is. So what I've got in the yellow here is these are the things that all students have to do. Okay, so you've got the TOK, you've got the essay, you've got the CAS stuff. So these, what you can see is I've got, for example, I've got the English literature class up here that a lot of students do. And then I've just, for example, got history down here as well. So you can see in both classes, no matter what you actually take, there are combined assessments in yellow. So no matter what your subject is, you're doing all of these different things. But depending on your actual subject, there are different assessments from time to time. So you can see the difference here just between English Lit and history. The history assessment has only 2 major periods of assessment. Okay, so you've got 20% over here, and then the 80% over at the end with those 3 different exams. Okay? Versus the English Lit, in this case, you've got internal, so this is speaking, you've got something here in the first year, you've got your first written one, then you've got, again, another spoken one, and then all of your other external ones that are actually written papers in the final exams that happen in May at the end of the 2 years. So depending on your subject, there are different timelines, and you do want to be really well aware of what those timelines are. And really the point of this is to know when you should be stressed and when you actually don't need to be stressed. Because I think a lot of students, they just sort of maintain a consistent amount of stress all year long, and you can really burn out. Okay, you know, that's never really any good. So with your different subjects, you want to know when those assessments are happening, not the mocks, not the practices, but the real ones, so you know when you need to focus, when you need to make sure that those grades come in. Yeah, okay. Versus the AL. So the AL subjects, you know, there are actually a lot of different AL subjects, but the way that I like to think about those different subjects is based on your university degrees. You can kind of categorize university degrees into, you know, simple things like, do I want something related to mathematics? Do I want something related to history? That might be, at Cambridge, for example, that might be politics and modern history, right? You know, some degree like that. So you can kind of group your A-levels into major categories of university degrees, okay? And there's really only 3 that you need to take. So again, we just saw with the IB, you have to take 6. Usually what people will do is they'll try out 4 at the subsidiary level and try to try them out to kind of get a good idea of what the feel is. And then in that second year, only sort of end up with 3 A-levels for their advanced diploma. Ideally though, you know, students take 3 to 5. 5, actually you do need to check with your school. They might not even allow that. It has a lot to do with resources. You know, are there enough teachers to actually teach that subject? Are there spaces for you in the classroom if you want to do 5? So you do need to check with your school if you're going to plan on doing 5. But I would highly recommend 4. Because if you have 4 A-levels, not 4 AS, 4 ALs, what you can do is you get those 4 scores, and then you just sort of submit your best 3, as far as meeting conditions for the university. So if you look at UK universities, they're actually very clear. You can go to any UK uni website and say, we want A star, AA, or we want at least BBB, right? And maybe you have a C. Well, if you've got 4, you only need to submit 3 of those. And yes, it's a little bit more work, it's a lot more exams, but you've got that safety net, you've got that parachute at the end to make sure, okay, I can probably meet these conditions with what I've chosen. Yeah. And this is kind of a new program here. It's all exam-based. Over the last several years, the A-levels have been kind of going through an identity change, an identity crisis, some might say. They've really been trying to compete with the IB. The rise of the IB has kind of caught the A-level guys off their guard. We see fewer and fewer schools using IB around the world, using A-levels around the world, and more IB. So they're trying to revamp this, redesign it, and over the last several years, for all these new subjects, they've basically made these 100% exam-based. And again, there's some advantages, some disadvantages to that, especially if you're an independent worker, you're really good at managing your own time, and you want to just sit down and do a test. You're great at tests, you're an excellent test taker. Okay, you can destroy those tests. Some subjects will give you an opportunity for other forms of assessment. Obviously, if you're doing art, depending on your exam board, you got to look at your subjects. If you're doing something like art, if you're doing something like design, if you're doing science, obviously with chemistry, there's going to be various lab practices that you might need to do throughout the year. But again, depending on your exam board, these don't even count for anything. They're basically pass-fail. And nobody fails them ever because they just don't allow people to fail. So it is, again, 100% just based on exams at the end of the year now for these A-levels in a 2-year linear program now. So here, if you can remember back briefly to the IB timeline, the IB timeline was just a little bit more complex, just a little bit more advanced than this one. So I've kind of got chemistry up here for the GCE ALs and math down here at the bottom. So yes, you're going to have sort of assignments from your teacher throughout the course itself, but 100% of your examinations are just at the end. So again, if we're thinking about what are the benefits, what are the advantages, the disadvantages of this, don't mess up on your tests. Because one mistake you'll have several papers for math, right? I think you'll have about 4. But if you make a big mistake on one of those tests, or if you suddenly forget something, it will have a massive impact on your grade versus an IB diploma where you've had so many different assessments that they're weighted more evenly. You can see, if we go back really quickly, the percentages, you've got, this is worth 15%. Right, so 15% is not going to make or break you, and maybe you only get 12 of that 15, maybe you only get 10 of that 15, but again, it's not the only assignment for you, and so you've got a lot more opportunities to get that score. Again, just for chemistry, yeah, 12 practicals, 12 different activities to perform. But it's really up to the teacher. And the teacher, what the teacher will do for something like this, whether it's chemistry, whether it's art and design, or any of these sorts of subjects, the teacher can schedule these whenever they want. It's just throughout the 2 years, there's just sort of a journal log of what's been going on. 99% of the time, the A-level people will never really ask what's going on. There is always the idea that, oh, someone could come in and ask us, are you doing all the work that you need to? Are the students having all the opportunities? But for the most part, these are just sort of planned throughout the year whenever, and it's very, very hard to fail. So almost everybody passes, and then you've got all your exams at the end. So essentially, with all these new changes to the A-levels, the subsidiary level, the first lower level, is now kind of its own standalone qualification. So especially if you want to go to the UK, right? The AS is kind of a way for students to explore different subjects, right? We saw earlier, oh, you could take 4 AS, and that kind of gives you an idea of you know, what you're interested in, what your passions are, and then maybe you can drop one, right? So that's kind of the A-levels way of saying we allow for exploration out of the 3 or 4 choices that you do make. But now it's sort of all fully linear. It leads to those final exams in the end for the AL, and it's just all pushed to a 2-year program. Whereas in the past there were a lot more exam dates, especially for international students. As far as the scores, you can get an E. An E looks really nice, but it's basically an F. And then there's the A and the A star. They didn't always have the A star. But you know, with the American system giving A pluses and with the IB system having a 7 sort of figure score, the A-levels a few years back started adding A stars. And again, this is just their way of trying to compete with other programs. So, breaking down the disadvantages of each, if we're going to be honest about them, the IB, more assessments more often. We saw, you know, the guy over here with the red eyes, he doesn't sleep. There are a lot of things to do. And then when you add on athletics, you add on community service, service trips even, and then family vacations, and, you know, how dare you if you want to have a personal life with friends, right? It's tough. It's very tough, right? So with the IB, there are a lot more things to take care of. And that sort of comes to this next point. It's harder to learn, but it is also harder to teach. You know, from our perspective here, we work with I think 96 different schools around the world. Our students here at Causeway come from 96 different schools, HK, US, UK, and then all around the world. And a lot of these students are IB students. And all the time we hear of teachers sort of struggling to implement the IB system because it's so complex. So yes, you're in an IB school, and this school has been doing IB for, you know, 10 years now, and wow, it's such a great IB school, and the results are amazing. But do you have a new teacher? How long has your teacher been teaching the IB, right? Because some teachers really do struggle actually implementing this, and it does take time to actually become an official examiner, to get that accreditation, and then do all of these things very well within your subject. So, to be honest, as a student, it's quite hard, and then for new teachers, if you are going into an IB school, if you're looking to enter an IB school, try to get yourself a teacher who's been there for a little while. You know, talk to the administrators about the length of time the teacher's been there. You don't want somebody who's just getting in now. They might not be able to give you all the advice. And then again, here, disadvantages. This just takes up so much more of your time with the TOK, the CAS, the extended essay, so there is a lot to do. Disadvantages of the A-levels, on the other hand, like we said earlier, everything is at the end. So it is really make or break. 100% of your score does come from those exams. Even if you are, you know, practicing chemistry labs or creating a sculpture for art or whatever it is. The other issue is that there are 5 different exam boards. I don't know why this is. I don't know why. Basically, the UK government sanctions these guys to profit off of their version of the A-levels, okay? And these are 5, you have to look at these 5 exam boards as like, I don't know, 5 different soda companies. You know, you've kind of got Coke, and Coke is the Cambridge exams. Cambridge is like the #1 sort of A-level program. So if you could get into the CIE, or if you're looking at schools who use CIE for the Cambridge assessments, that is the most valued A-level. EdXL, if you've ever heard of EdXL, a lot of people in Hong Kong, a lot of schools in Hong Kong use EdXL. That's kind of like the Pepsi, okay? But then you've got the AQA, and you've got all these other guys who are just sort of like, you know, the Sprites and the Fantas of the world, who they want their slice of the pie, but how do they get it? They have to make their exams different, they have to make their programs different. So there's a lot of agreement and disagreement between these exam boards of how to implement the A-levels. So if you're going to a new A-level school, and if you're looking into different schools for different A-levels, ask the administrators, ask the councils what exam boards they use for the subjects you're interested in, and make sure you have a clear idea of what those exam boards expect, how they run their percentages, how you get that A star for this exam board, because there are differences. And that can be quite confusing. But again, guys, I'd highly recommend either the CIE, the Cambridge version, or the Pearson EdXL version. Those are kind of like the top two. And then here, no research papers, no athletics, no activities. You're not doing any community service. So what we'll see with schools is that the schools themselves will require students like, hey, listen, this isn't part of your A-levels. We know it's not part of the A-levels, but we actually require you as a Harrow student or whatever, wherever you go, to participate in these activities. We're going to run service programs for you. But if you are looking at new schools, make sure, you got to ask them, okay, listen, I'm glad that you guys do the A-levels, but how do you make up for a lack of athletics in the A-level programs? How do you make up for a lack of service in those A-levels? And make sure that they do have some sort of policy or some sort of system in place. Why? For your university applications, for your resume, because you do not want to have a resume, especially to the US, where all you did is have your head in a book for 2 years. They won't think you're human, right? They really want to see a well-rounded kind of individual in those US university applications. The UK, obviously, to a certain extent as well, but they're much more comfortable with the A-level system, because this is the pill they've chosen to swallow, and they sort of say, hey, this is our system, and we believe in it, but make sure your school does offer those opportunities. Advantages, global recognition. They prepare you for university. This is what they all want you to say. It's the gold standard of education, where no other system prepares you for university like the A-levels. No other system prepares you for university like the IB. Yeah, okay, great. I mean, they're doing their job, fantastic. Sugar is sweet. This sort of truth. These are college or university prep systems, so obviously they should prepare you for college. That's their job, right? Other than that, it is kind of the same sort of disadvantage-advantage thing depending on your perspective. So the advantage of more assessments in IB is the percentages are smaller, right? So if you do make that mistake, you're going to be able to recover, right? On the other hand, the advantage of the A-levels, all those assessments at once. Oh, if I make a mistake, then I'm doomed. Well, yeah, maybe, but you have 2 years to prepare for that, that one time period of exams. So use your time wisely. This is very doable. There's no excuse when you've got that much time to be unprepared. And there are so many past papers and so many things that the CIE or the EdXL will provide for you guys to make sure that you know exactly what the assessments look like. There's no secrets. They're not going to suddenly change it or anything like that. So you should be really prepared for those A-levels. As far as the IB profile, you do look way more well-rounded, and again, that's just for your university admissions. The schools don't really need to worry about designing their own program. The IB does that for them. The score translations, however, this is something that we haven't talked about yet. Everybody loves the IB. Everybody loves the IB, especially in the US, and we'll get into this more in a second, but you've got the A star, which is the top grade, right? And you've got the 7, which is the top grade, but is it a 7 in a standard level, or is it a 7 in a higher level? Okay? There is no A star higher level, there is no A star standard level for the A level, it's just A star, that's it. So when universities actually try translating these scores, they look at your HLs, they look at your higher level IBs and say, oh wow, you got a 7, but you also got a 7 in a higher level class that, Ivy League universities will actually take these for university credits in the IB. So when you get that top score in a higher level, the score translation is really in your favor for IB and for that process. Other than that, the one advantage is a very clear structure with that only one exam board versus the 5 different exam boards here. But the trade-off for the A-levels is it's super focused. You're not taking 6 classes, you're not taking 6 subjects. You actually get to pick what your 3 are, what your 4 are, what your 5 are, and they're almost always complementary. So if I want to study some sort of natural science in university, I want my A-level subjects to focus on preparation for natural science at university, right? Whereas, okay, I want to study natural science at university, why do I need to take 2 languages if I'm going to take natural science at university? So this is a lot more well-rounded, which, you know, arguably has its advantages and disadvantages. This, on the other hand, is highly focused. Again, preparation, preparation, preparation for university. So what about all those universities? You know, you kind of think about the Oxbridge, you think of the Ivy League, and all these different schools. How do they and how do other universities sort of look at these things and weigh the scores? This is the simplified version. It's a very direct translation, and again, I'm not even going to go below 4, because even if you're getting a 5, if you're a B student, a lot of the universities these days, BBB is sort of the backup. That should be your safety university. If you're scoring C's, you might want to resit your A-levels, you might want to retake some IB exams. So the 4 is never really acceptable from a Hong Kong perspective. It's really competitive. But again, what are those HLs? Because with such a direct translation these days, the 7 is the A-star, but what about the HL7? It's unofficially weighed more by admissions counselors, right? When they see the 7 HL, they know how hard it was, and they really value that, arguably more than the A-star. And with those grades in mind, this was actually recently completed by the Higher Education Statistics Agency. After several years of studying tens of thousands of students who have actually completed the IB and who have actually completed the AL, and what they found is when it comes to top 20 universities, there was a huge advantage for IBDP students on the whole versus the AL students who made it into those elite institutions. So you're kind of seeing a 2-to-1 correlation here of IB. But again, these top 20 universities, this is sort of globally, right? It's not just UK. Obviously the UK, they love their own system, they love the ALs. But if you're thinking about going to the US, if you're thinking about going to a place like HKU or some of these other schools in the region, the IB is the place to be. But again, for STEM, because you can focus those ALs on, I want to do chem, I want to do bio, I want to do this and that, you can actually focus a lot more on those sciences, and you can't do that in the IB, right? You can choose a science, and then you do have another option. Okay, you might do another science, but it's still not 3 sciences, it's 2. Okay, so with STEM, the A-levels are arguably a better choice because you can actually choose 3 to 4 complementary sciences that really help you out for your university diploma. That being said, and I was actually talking about this with one of my students earlier, the IB students tend to go on to even further their education even more into master's programs and PhD programs, and this is based on what we were talking about, critical thinking and understanding different contexts, different perspectives. Anybody who's ever completed a master's or PhD, context, 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 you really have to have a deep understanding of one particular perspective in relation to every perspective. And so when we see IB students who go through that well-rounded training program, they're able to do that and they feel more comfortable going on to those master's programs or PhDs. So if you're planning to go into an MA after your BA, or if you're planning on doing a joint degree program, the IB might be a little bit better preparation for you, depending on your subject, if that is a STEM or not. So here are some examples really quickly with the US, the UK. And these are the most up-to-date from Oxford, so you see Cambridge, you see Oxford in there. And for the UK, you'll see the UK at the top and the US at the bottom, and you'll notice what I've done is I've actually got 2 specific programs for the UK versus US averages. If you see right here, the UK is far more specific about their minimum requirements than the US. Okay, so for university admissions, and if you guys have any other questions about just university admissions in general, please let me know. For university admissions in the US, they're looking at a lot of different essays, they're looking at a lot of different personal statements and overall profile. They don't require one particular subject or another. They don't say, oh, you took chemistry, so you can't get a degree in English literature. No. You can get a degree in whatever you want. Versus the UK side, they actually tell you exactly what you need to get for your 3 higher levels, for your A levels, and then they'll be even more specific about which particular A levels you took. You cannot apply here. We won't even look at you unless you take this math or unless you take this science. Otherwise, go away. Whereas the US side, you can take whatever you want. You can explore all these different things because for US universities, you don't have to declare your major until your 3rd year of university. Whereas with the UK, you actually have to declare your major before you leave high school, right? You have to do it now. And a lot of, 17, 18-year-old students, and I don't really know what I want to do. So, it's very restrictive as far as those A levels and those IB HLs. But I do want to draw your attention here. So you've got UPenn, which is an Ivy League school, right? Great school. A lot of people in Hong Kong want to go to Wharton, for business and these kinds of things. But you also look at Southern Cal. And anybody who's ever been to California or knows the University of Southern California knows that it is a very elite institution. It's a private school. It is very difficult to get into. And you start to notice what happens with these sorts of schools outside the Ivies, right? The Ivies and the Oxbridge, okay, arguably comparative, right? Ivy League school, Oxbridge schools, very, very similar. But once you start to get out of those, you see how much more valuable every IB point is compared to the A levels. Ivy League, we want AAA. We're not going to even look at you for AAA. This is the typical average for students, AAA, 38 IB, versus, hey, actually, we don't trust the A levels as much as the IB. We actually prefer IB scores. We only need you to get a minimum of a 35 typically for our students. And these are just averages, guys. So that means people can get higher than a 35, people can get lower than a 35. But you start to see with US schools how valuable the IB is. But in general, you have very restrictive UK applications, highly restrictive. Minimum standards must be met versus a lot more, diverse student profiles for the US schools. Super quick tips, and we'll wrap this up a little bit. Again, know the deadlines that actually matter. One example that I can tell you right now is for the IB. A lot of IB students are doing their mock exams, these few weeks. And the teachers at school for the final year of the seniors, the teachers at school say, oh, these mocks are really important. You got to focus on these mocks. Don't mess around with these mocks. You have to do well on your mocks. That's not actually true. The schools, obviously, they don't want students falling asleep in class and skipping school and all these things. But we already know the real deadlines that actually matter. And then that's where you can kind of say, listen, how important are these mocks versus other things that I need to complete? Obviously, I don't want to fail my mocks. I want to try my best and these sorts of things. But knowing the deadlines that actually matter versus mocks and practices and all these other things can save you a lot of sleep, can save you a lot of stress, and actually make the IB a lot more manageable. Choose your HLs wisely. HLs, because we said earlier, if you have a 6 HL, if you have a 7 HL, that really helps you get into a particular program that you want to. It's not required in the US, but it is required in the UK. You saw we want these minimum HLs in these particular subjects. So when you are choosing your HLs, you want to kind of be a little bit more focused versus your SLs. SLs, you can kind of have a little bit more freedom. You've got an option that you can work with. But other than that, do the past papers. There are so many past papers, and we work with a lot of students here. I want to do this paper, I want to do that paper, and then you can see again for the A levels as well. Just know what the actual assessments look like to reduce that stress, get more sleep, and feel a little bit more comfortable. For A levels, we said this earlier, but go for 4. There's no reason why you shouldn't do 4, especially when all the exams are at the end of the year and you've got 2 years to go for it. 2 years is a very long time. You've got nothing else to do for the programs, prepare for those tests, and then, in worst case scenario, you really don't do well in one of your A-levels, but you've got those 3 backups that can help you apply for one particular program and meet your conditions, right? Decide the UK degree really early if you want to, because of all those restrictions before you pick your A-levels. IB, there's a lot more classes to make up for that, but with the A-levels, you've only got 3, hopefully 4. And then, like I said earlier, guys, ask your school about their exam boards. CIE is the most valued. EdXL is probably the number 2. But again, talk to your schools, ask them what subjects they use for their, what exam boards they use for their subjects, and make sure you put yourself in a good position. So some of the things we do with students here is we do regular IB courses. I know we were talking about a course earlier where we introduce students to what those IB assessments look like. One of the things that we like to do with students is give them watered down versions of IB assessments, whether it's the internal, whether it's the external, watered down versions of the A-levels, practicing with IGCSEs, but also, in a private setting, you can actually say, listen, what are my strengths, what are my weaknesses, how do I go from a B to an A to an A star, all these sorts of things. And I think as far as parents, as you guys are concerned, using those vacation times, using those off times from school wisely, and at the very least, asking your learner, asking your student, what are you doing over this break for your subjects? Have you decided about A-levels? Do you know what you want to do? Do you want to do IB? What option? What science? These sorts of things. And just try to prepare around, key vacations, key test dates, things like that. But other than that, guys, thank you so much for coming in. I really appreciate it. And if you do have any questions, I'd be happy to help you out. So thank you very much.